Hello, my name is Lisa Haywood. I work for the Department of Education and specifically in the Bureau of Student Wellness. And today's session is about keeping positive attitudes in your students in the online classroom. This session is geared toward middle and high school teachers and administrators who are teaching online using a learning management system and LMS such as Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas, Google Classroom. So let me move into share mode. The session overview is really a preventative approach as much as possible, and we'll look at how you can create a safe learning environment online, how you can replicate brick and mortar expectations for virtual behavior. We'll talk about how your leadership and modeling impacts student behavior, how you can establish positive standards. We'll look at NETIQUETTE, what it is, some examples, how to write one. And we'll talk a little bit about consequences in writing. And we'll end by looking towards the future, some tips and suggestions for you when we all move on in the next few months. So the good news is that there are some best strategies in creating positive student behavior online. There's been 20 years of research and best practice for managing virtual student behavior. And while most of it has been geared towards the college level and adult learning, the same principles apply in middle school and high school. Primarily, prevention is the most effective approach that you can use to create positive student behavior and to mitigate negative and disruptive student behavior. The premise of all this is that when students are thrown into an unknown and inconsistent environment, they feel unsafe. And when students feel unsafe, when boundaries of behavior and academic boundaries are not clear, or when they're reinforced inconsistently, it creates a fertile field for disruptive behavior. Conversely, if you create a consistent and predictable environment for students, they feel safe. When they're safe, when there's consistent reinforcement, when there are clear expectations, positive behavior is promoted. So think about this in terms of a brick and mortar institution and a virtual classroom. When students go to school in the morning, they know what to expect when they walk in the building. They know where their locker is, they know what their schedule is like, they know where their classes are, they know when they walk into a classroom where to find their books, they know to sit down, they know the teacher will start talking, they know that this might be followed by some group activities and homework, and then the students will leave the class and move on to the next one. So it's a very consistent structure for the student throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the school year. Students feel safe because they know what to expect. And in the online environment, it's the job of the teacher or the school to recreate that same safe, consistent structure, but it's going to happen in a virtual environment. So it will be the same types of standards and expectations, but they'll all be for online and not for a brick and mortar classroom. So behavior in a brick and mortar classroom, we all know good behavior results in positive consequences for the students, or neutral behavior. Students are well behaved, teachers and administrators can go about their daily business. When a student engages in disruptive behavior, we all know, the student knows, the family of the student knows that there's likely to be negative reinforcement, or if the behavior is extreme, there might be punishment. I've included absence into this discussion about behavior. Absence, when a student is absent in a brick and mortar classroom, we know that the teacher is likely to question them. There might be a varied response depending on the cause or of the absence, but students will probably not be able to get away with not showing up to class or just sitting in class and not saying anything. Behavior in a virtual classroom or a cyber classroom should look exactly the same. Be clear to students that the same standards apply. When they behave well, there'll be positive outcomes or neutral outcomes. When a student is disruptive, there's going to be negative reinforcement for them or punishment. And when a student is absent from the courtroom or absent at all from doing any work, find out what's going on. They'll be questioned, and there may be valid reasons for their absence, or there might be reasons that you want to explore in more detail with them. Your leadership is key to students feeling safe. When students sense you're in control, they're going to feel safe and they're going to behave well. So be a role model for them. Consistently respond to their positive behavior. Consistently respond to their disruptive behavior. And consistently respond to their absence. The way you do this in a virtual classroom, where you don't have body language to aid you, is through the use of visual graphics. Written explanations, written rules, written guidelines, and written consequences. You're going to find in the online environment that everything is print-based or visual graphic-based. When you write your expectations for student behavior, make sure it's simple, age-appropriate language, it's clear, you haven't forgotten any details. Make sure it's visible in the courtroom. Students know where they're going to go to find those written expectations. Make sure that it's relatively technology-free to access your written expectations. Make sure they're comparable to the brick and mortar classroom. And again, visible. Make sure your written expectations are posted in the course site very clearly and very conspicuously. One of the best practices for this is a netiquette. So what is a netiquette? The word netiquette is a combination of net from internet and etiquette, which really means respecting others' views and displaying courtesy when posting your views to the online discussion group or an online classroom. So, as a best practice, give your students a netiquette. Make sure it's developmentally appropriate in terms of the language and the concepts. You know the age group of students who you're working with, so you probably can speak to that in a lot more, in a much better way than I can. In practice, a netiquette should have 5 to 10 rules, and you can decide what they are. There are really no right or no wrong rules for what should be in a netiquette. It's really up to you, the teacher, or the school, or the administrator. But some things you should probably consider putting into a netiquette are the appropriate use of language and tone in the student's work, your expectations for grammar, punctuation, text, font, and colors, a clause about respect and consideration for other students, whether or not you're going to allow students to use sarcasm, humor, and the posting of jokes. Some of you might like it, some of you might not want to open that door. Talk to your students about the issue of privacy and information sharing outside of the classroom, and give them plagiarism guidelines. After you've created your netiquette, and we'll talk about some clauses in more detail in a few seconds, have your students sign and agree to the terms of it. So make sure you've got a written process for disruptive behavior in this. Make sure that students know and have access to the written process. Make sure you've got written consequences for disruptive behavior, and make sure students know and have access to those written consequences. And as a best practice, include a multiple offense policy and process in that. So let's take a look at some examples of what you might put in a netiquette. And these are just kind of a high school level list, but make sure it's age appropriate for what you teach. Here's one, language and tone. Call your clause language and tone. You might want to say something like, while it's easier to say hurtful and disrespectful things without standing face to face with someone, it's important to remember that your classmates and teachers are real people who are affected by the words you write. It's essential to keep in mind the feelings and opinions of others, even if they differ from your own. Tip: if you wouldn't say it to someone's face, don't say it online either. Another example: yes, grammar and spelling matter. And here's a bit of a joke. While texting text speak can be great for your friends, that's an incomplete sentence. In our online classroom, however, keep it formal. Your written communication should reflect proper writing style. Save written shortcuts and less than stellar grammar for Snapchat if you must, but follow grammar rules in our learning space. I should probably fix the grammar on that slide. Another clause: make your point in a nice way. Be aware of strong language, all caps, and exclamation points. It's easy for written text to be misread and misunderstood. Have you ever sent a text message with good intent, but your recipient thought you were being rude? If so, then you've experienced this firsthand. Be cognizant of strong language. You can identify potential confusions before sending messages. Tip: read everything out loud before you send it. Disagree politely. Use resources ethically. Cite your sources. Whenever you're sharing an idea that originated from someone else, even if it's not word for word, cite that source. This applies to discussion forums too. If you read a great thought in your text, share it, but be sure you let your audience know where you saw it first. Remember, your words are permanent, so are your images. Don't post or share, even privately, inappropriate material in this course site. Enough said. Nothing is truly private online. Be careful with humor and sarcasm. Certainly you shouldn't avoid being funny. We love to see your personality shine through in online classes. Many of our teachers are exceptionally funny too. Make sure that it's clear that you're being funny and not being rude or hurtful. Emoticons and smileys can be helpful when conveying humor and sarcasm so that it's read correctly. But just remember, keep the smiley faces away from academic papers. You can also include visual aids in a netiquette. Here's one that I pulled off the internet. So if you Google visual aids for netiquette, you're going to come up with any number of nice little posters that have been shared broadly. Moving on, now that you know what a netiquette is and you've seen some examples of clauses that you can include in them, let's talk about reinforcing positive behavior openly. If a student does something well in the discussion forum or in the live chat session, compliment them on it. Reinforce their good behavior just like you would in the traditional classroom. Lead by example. And again, prevention is the best approach to mitigate bad behavior or negative behavior and to promote positive behavior. Let's take a breath. This is my taking a breath slide before I transition. When disruptive behavior happens, you need to intervene immediately. So be swift in your response. Remember, you've already posted your rules and your guidelines in your course site. You've already told students what the consequences are for it and what the process is that you're going to use to enforce the consequences. So intervene swiftly. And above all, intervene consistently. If one student engages in disruptive behavior, follow up with it. If another student does, follow up with it in the same way. I know this can be exhausting at first, but as soon as your students know that you're serious about this, they're going to reduce their negative behavior or their disruptive behavior or their absences. So it's going to take some work and some getting used to, but once you've established your leadership in the classroom, students will be much more willing to engage positively. Absence. If a student is absent from the course room, reach out privately and find out why. Are they absent because they're not feeling well? Are they absent because they don't understand online learning? Are they absent because they just don't have access to the internet? There can be any number of reasons why students are absent from the course room, but reach out privately and find out why and see if you can help them. What happens when you have active disruptive behavior? So you can respond in a number of ways. You can respond privately to the student or students, or if you think this is a learning opportunity for the other students, you can respond openly to the students. So if a student writes something offensive and you don't think they intended to be offensive, you might write to them, this is a good opportunity for us to step back and think about what you wrote and how it could have been said differently. So consider the situation and then make your determination about responding privately to a student. Probably I would do that in more severe cases, or if you don't want to embarrass a student. But if you think it's a good opportunity for a learning moment for the other students, you can respond openly or publicly in the discussion forum or the live chat room. But make sure your response is swift and consistent. So let's take a pause and look into the future. So in an ideal world, first day of class, first week of class, get together with your students and actually create a netiquette with them. Having student buy-in to rules and guidelines always is a good way to have the students really believe and self-manage. You could also have a school-wide netiquette or a grade-wide netiquette. And you can build it into the learning management system, Moodle, Canvas, Classroom, Blackboard, whatever you use, as part of a student learning contract that every student signs at the beginning of the school year. Obviously, it's more difficult to do school-wide netiquettes right now, and it's probably a bit clunky right now to create one with your class. Now is probably a good time for you to build your own until you have the opportunity to start fresh with your students next year. Have students write one right now. Make it an independent assignment. Tell students to research netiquette, have them write it as an individual assignment. Or if you're comfortable using group assignments in Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, or an LMS, have them do it as a group assignment. It's always good to engage students in the self-regulation process. And again, remember, prevention is the best approach for most students, not for every student, but most students want to do well. They want to please you. They want to be regarded as positive members in their online classroom. And that is the end of my slideshow. So once again, I hope this was helpful to you. My name is Lisa Haywood. You can reach out to the Department of Education and the Bureau of Wellness if you have any more questions or more specific questions, and I am glad to help. Have a great day and stay healthy.